this week's episode, I'm going to be telling you some more Reddit ghost stories. I love reading these. You never know if they're true or not. So yeah, without further ado, let's get spooky. So this first one is titled My Only Ghost Story. I'll start off by saying that I don't believe that I was haunted, and I don't believe in the paranormal. I'm atheist. I was raised atheist, so the notion that there is a spiritual world is not really a part of my culture. That being said, the first house I bought was an older house, built in 1880. One time, our town had a massive fire, and my house was used to triage victims because the hospital was across the street at the time of the fire, and there were several casualties, some likely in my house. I used to leave this detail out because I don't think it's relevant. People believe that is the reason the ghosts are there. So, first day, we are moving in, and I pile a bunch of things up on a table as we are unpacking. Well, it gets late and we go to bed. I don't clear the table off. I wake up suddenly at 3 a.m. and it's cold in the house. I remember that I may have left a window in the living room open. I go to close the window and notice all of the items from the table are now on the floor, stacked neatly, just as they were put on the table, just on the floor. In my half-asleep state, I just start cleaning the items and put them back on the table. While I'm doing that, my brother comes out from his room to find me cleaning up the items. He helps me and walks away, and I go back to bed. So morning comes, and my wife and I wake up. We're lying next to each other, and the ceiling fan comes on all by itself. We laugh it off and joke about her dead mother sending us a sign. My wife gets up to make a coffee, and I get dressed. By the time I make it out into the living room, my wife is picking up the same pile of items that my brother had witnessed me cleaning up in the middle of the night. We all had a chuckle about how weird it was. Nothing else has ever happened. The fan never malfunctioned, and we had the table in that location for years, and no more weirdness. Ooh, that one is very interesting. I guess the fan could be explained away, but the clothes on the table being on the floor, that's pretty strange, not gonna lie. This next one is titled Simple Ghost Story. Our attic was a large finished playroom with all of our toys and games and stuff, so it was where I hung out with my friends and everything. One day, my sister, my best friend at the time John, and his brother Caesar were all up there goofing around and decided to contact the spirits or whatever. None of us really believed in any of it, so it was just for laughs. But we shut the lights off and started to ask for a sign and things like that. We sat in the quiet for a bit, and nothing seemed to happen, until out of nowhere we heard the timer on the game Perfection start to count down. It's one of those wind-up timers. You need to turn the dial as it counts down. The dial slowly spins back and you can hear the ticking. It doesn't work until you physically spin it. So it was obviously unnerving. My friend's little brother screamed, "Stop," as he was scared, and the ticking stopped. We composed ourselves and asked the spirit to turn it back on, and it instantly started ticking again. We were all freaking out at this point and looking around at each other like, what the heck? Someone said stop. It stopped. We asked to turn it back on. It turned back on. This happened 4 or 5 times until the timer ran out. That's when the game makes a loud pop sound and the board shoots the pieces out. Everyone screamed when that happened because we weren't expecting it at all. Caesar literally opened the 3rd-story window and wanted to jump out onto the roof. He was so terrified. That's hilarious. It was super intense. I'll never forget it. No explanation at all. Oh my gosh, that was really good. I enjoyed that. That one seems kind of true, because it seems like a pretty basic story, you're just with your friends and this little creepy thing happens. I liked that. Next up, my mother's unique and terrifying ghost story. I've been meaning to tell this story on here for a while, and just about the time to tell it. My mother has some I've heard and collected many stories over the course of my life, and her stories are not only terrifying, but unique. Out of all the ghost stories she has shared with me over the years, the one I'm about to tell you stands out the most. Ooh, I'm excited. When my mother was a little girl, she and her family lived out of McAllen, Texas, in a small neighborhood. Behind the few houses, there was a field full of orange trees that she and her brothers, as well as neighborhood children, used to play in. On this particular day, there was a family visiting. My mother and her cousin Patty went out to play in the orange field. She said at the end of the field there was a dirt road with fields across from that. Once they reached the dirt road, my mother said that she and her cousin noticed a family walking towards them, a man and his wife. The wife was pushing an old-timey baby carriage. The family was also dressed very old-fashioned, like from the late 1800s or so. My mother and her cousin stopped and watched them for a moment because they had seemed so out of place. However, as they neared both my mother and Patty, the two of them noticed that they were covered in blood, head to toe. The man apparently noticed my mum and her cousin and tipped his top hat to her. My mum says that she also looked into the baby carriage from her viewpoint and noticed it was filled with blood. That was when her and her cousin ran off screaming back to the house. Yeah, I think I would as well. My mother told her family what they had seen, and they all went out to the back porch, but because of the orange field, no one could see anything. My great-uncle picked up my mother and put her on his shoulders and asked if she could see anything, to which my mother replied, yes. My mother said she saw them walk off down the road and into the nearby forest, and that was the last time she ever saw them. I've been wanting to do more research on this place, but have yet to ask my mum whereabouts it was. The last time she told me the story, she said as far as she knew, all the houses had been torn down, as well as the orange field, and that there is a hotel there. I'm extremely interested in seeing if anyone in that area has seen what my mother and her cousin saw, and if the hotel is haunted. I'll be contacting my mother in the morning to gather more information, such as where it was, and maybe with Reddit's help, we might be able to come up with some incident that happened back in the old days that might give my mother and I some sort of explanation. Regardless, I wanted to share this story with everyone. That was so interesting. Like, could you imagine seeing that as a kid and then not really knowing what the crack was? Like, if my mom told me a story like that, I would be doing research too. Like, I would be all up on that. Okay, so this next one is titled, I Saw a Ghost in the Hospital. My mum, actually, quite a few years ago, she came out of an operation, and at the foot of her bed she saw both her parents, and to this day she believes like she really saw them. And we actually went to see like a psychic probably like 2 or 3 weeks ago now, and she asked if she had seen them, and she said yeah, and the woman spelled out the hospital that my mum was in, so it was pretty legit. It was very interesting. When I was about 11, I went to the hospital for a checkup. Whilst walking down one of the corridors, I saw a nurse pushing an elderly woman in a wheelchair. The lady in the wheelchair looked familiar, but I couldn't quite remember her. As they went past, the lady in the chair smiled and waved at me, so I waved back with a smile. My carer and the nurse looked at me funny, and my carer asked who was I waving at. I said, the lady in the chair that just went past us, to which she said, what lady? I looked around just as the nurse was turning a corner. I could see the wheelchair was indeed empty. A few days later, I was talking with my carer, and she told me my nan had passed away. I hadn't seen her in years, as I was in foster care at the time. I was very close to my nan, so it hit me hard. The next time I saw my mum, I mentioned the lady I had seen in the hospital. My mum asked what she looked like, so I described her. My mum showed a picture of my nan on her phone, and she matched exactly to the lady I had seen in the hospital. We talked for a bit, and I said what hospital I'd seen her in, and that she was wearing a white nightgown with lace all down the arms and a fluffy blanket. My mum then told me that the hospital was passed away a few hours before I saw her, and she was wearing the same nightgown and a fluffy white blanket. To this day, I still can't believe my nan knew I was coming to the hospital and stuck around to say a final goodbye. Oh, that is so sweet. Oh, they're the kind of ghost things you want to see, you know. Okay, so this last one I'm gonna read to you is titled, I Was Raised in a Haunted House. I was born in a Victorian terraced house. When I was about 7, I was walking down the attic stairs. They were in a spiral. When I turned to face the landing, I saw an old man leaning against the banister about 2 meters in front of me. He had blood down his face and on his shirt. I screamed. I didn't even think about ghosts. I thought we had a real person in our house. My parents ran up the stairs and found me in a bit of a state, calmed me down, and explained that they knew about him. Apparently, when they moved in, they would see a white figure walking along the landing from downstairs. In the lounge, you could look up onto the hall landing upstairs. They thought one of my brothers was out of bed, so would check, and they weren't. They purposefully didn't tell my brothers in case it scared them, but eventually they saw it too. You'd also hear him walking up and down the attic stairs. They were old, and every step had a distinctly unique sound. You could literally tell the part of the stairs someone was on just by their sound, and at the bottom you'd hear a loud hollow thump. I was the only one who saw the man in detail. Everyone else saw him as a white figure. I saw him once more up close, and then only saw him as a white figure after that. My dad asked the man across the street, who had lived there his whole life, about the history of our house. He didn't say anything about a ghost. The man said that before us, an old couple lived there. The woman died, and the man became an alcoholic. One day a neighbour found him outside the door. He tripped up the curb and smashed his head. He helped him and put him in his chair. I didn't think it looked too bad, but a few days later he was actually found dead. We would hear him most nights. I'd have to have the radio on all night to drown him out. He never did anything bad, just appeared now and then and noisily walked up and down. I don't know why, but we never thought of telling anyone. It was normal. He lived there. Our neighbours also saw him walking along the landing one day when they visited. I was homeschooled for the last year, and my home tutor was there once. It was only us two in the house. We heard walking above us, and she looked up and asked if any of my brothers had come home. I told her it was just the ghost, and she looked so freaked out, left early, and refused to tutor me without someone else there. I moved out when I was 19, and my parents sold it a few years later. I dream about the house still, after 23 years, pretty much every few days. It's like I'm linked to it, maybe because I was born in it. Anyway, sorry it's so long, but this is what got me interested in the subject. I've had a few more experiences at other times since, but this is the main one, and I just thought I'd add this in because it's weird, but I spoke perfectly fine before I saw him, and ever since that moment I've had a debilitating stutter, and I've seen many speech therapists through the years, but it's been no use. How interesting. I wonder if it's connected or if it's coincidental. Yep, get the word right. Coincidental. That's a very interesting story. I love how the whole family's just like, yeah, it's the guy that used to live here, probably. Just ignore him kind of thing. So, I hope you guys enjoyed some of those ghost stories from Reddit. Like I said in the previous one I did a few weeks ago, I do love reading some of these because you just never know, are they true, are they not? So yeah,